This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodwin with Nermeen Sheikh.
We turn now to Sudan, which is facing the world's largest humanitarian crisis as it enters its third year of a devastating civil war between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. Tens of thousands have died and some 13 million have been forcibly displaced. There are also widespread reports of sexual and ethnically motivated violence and a worsening hunger crisis. On Tuesday, officials from 20 countries gathered in London at a high-level international conference chaired by the UK, the EU and African Union to find a pathway to peace. But talks have reportedly collapsed. In Sudan's western Darfur region, the UN reports attacks by the RSF last weekend killed at least 300 people in refugee camps as paramilitaries took control of the Zamzam camp, which had housed some 500,000 people. The NGO Relief International said 9 employees, the entire staff of the camp's only remaining health clinic, were killed in the attack, along with at least 100 others, including children. Some 400,000 additional people are believed to have been displaced in the area just over the last few days.
We're joined now by 2 guests. In Oslo, Jan Egeland is with us, Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, and Emtithal Mahmoud, a Sudanese-American world champion slam poet from Darfur and Philadelphia, born in Khartoum. She's also a humanitarian activist and former refugee. Her new piece for Devex is headlined in Sudan, "The power must go to its people, not to the people in power." We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Emmy Mahmoud, describe what's happening in Darfur, describe what's happening in Sudan, as at this point we enter the 3rd year of this civil war between the paramilitary forces and the government.
Thank you so much for having us. It's so harrowing to describe. My family have lived in Zamzam camp, which is now completely destroyed, for almost 20 years, and the other half of my family is from Al-Fashir, which has been under siege for almost over a year. And what's so terrifying about what happened is that an IDP camp is an internally displaced person camp. This is supposed to be a place of refuge. But on Sunday and in the days before, the RSF brutally attacked the camp, killing more than 400 people by our count on the ground. They tortured and killed women and children, and they kidnapped 58 of the girls in my extended family, and we are still searching for them. We cannot find them. We have not seen them since Sunday. This brutality is something that we've seen during the Darfur genocide, and we've seen over and over again in this war and in many of the years from the start of the genocide and counting. I think that entering the 3rd year of war, we should not be terrified and confused about whether or not the international community is going to act to stop the Al-Fashir massacre from happening. We warned that the Zamzam massacre would be happening because the MSF reported a child dies every 2 hours from the man-made famine due to the siege. And now we're warning that the Al-Fashir massacre will happen as we actively try to evacuate people. Aid is in huge shortage, and we're not able to move international aid into Al-Fashir, or we were not able to move it into Zamzam either because the RSF will not let it pass. So currently, we're doing everything that we can through small donors and family members and community to continue moving our people who have now been 4 times displaced, including my family members. Many who have been killed and many who are still missing. And the injured are bleeding out without any care. So we're moving as fast as we can, but we need the world to pay attention.
I mean, we're so sorry for the suffering of your family and your family members who have been killed in this horrific war. If you could just kind of give us a quick sense of, how was this 2 years ago? How and why did this war begin between the government forces and the RSF? What's at stake?
Thank you for the question. The RSF is the Rapid Support Forces, and it's the latest iteration of the Janjaweed who terrorized Darfur for decades. And the SAF is the Sudanese Armed Forces. Now, the Sudanese Armed Forces created the Janjaweed and institutionalized the RSF under Bashir, the former dictator. So in 2018 and 2019, there was a lot of movement by the youth, including a lot of us from Darfur who walked for 1,000 kilometers, mobilizing thousands across the way and reaching Khartoum to inspire a collective responsibility for peace. Just a couple months after our peace walk in 2018, I was in Sudan to do it all over again in December, and that's when the revolution started. Now, the revolution was a peaceful revolution led by young people, led by women, and people called for an end to more than 30 years of dictatorship and horrible, horrible genocides, plural, including what happened in South Sudan in 21-year civil war. So in 2019, the world was very inspired, and people said blue for Sudan, and the people in Khartoum said العنصر المغرور كل البلد دارفور, which means you racist, you hypocrite, the entire country is Darfur. So they heard our cry, and that was to the dictator. In 2019, the dictator fell, and there was a moment of hope. But, there were these massacres of young people. They were sitting with sit-ins and peacefully just trying to push for democracy, which is something that we've all hoped for and prayed for, and that is something that's part of our culture. We're very democratic as indigenous people in Sudan and in Sudan in general. And then in 2019, hundreds were killed and thrown into the Nile, hundreds of children and young people in Khartoum who, I say children, but they were young people who were pushing. And I do say children because my cousin Mohammed, he was 15 years old when he was killed in January in 2019 at the beginning of the revolution. So many people were killed and thrown in the Nile. Many are still missing. So then in 2021, the RSF and the SAF cooperated to overthrow the civilian transition. So a civilian transitionary government was put in place with a deal that would be, it would spend 3 years, and in the first couple of years, the military would be in power, which us young people said, do not make this deal, do not cooperate with SAF and RSF, who are both liable for genocide in Darfur and other regions. But they did cooperate, and then in 2021, RSF and SAF cooperated for a coup that overthrew the civilian government and any hope for a peaceful transition. And then now in 2023, 2 years ago, right as we were getting ready for Eid Ramadan, the massacre began. This war is not a civil war, according to people on the ground. It is a war against the people because we do not consent to this war. So to make it very simple, you have two warring parties who used to cooperate to commit genocide and to, massacre our people. And now they fell out and are having this power struggle. And they're trying desperately to cling on to power. And they're being funded by many nations, rich nations, on both sides. And I say this as somebody who thinks that there should be zero tolerance for genocide. I understand that right now the RSF is the biggest danger for us in Darfur and all over the country. They've used sexual violence as a weapon of war. And the UNICEF reports that 12 million people are at risk of gender-based violence, and they're often repeatedly subject to the same thing. And they've created man-made famine, they've laid siege, they've done so many different things that are acts that constitute war crimes. The SAF has done the same. But the reality is the RSF and the SAF, they both need to be held accountable to stop this war, and their funders need to be held accountable too.
Well, we'd like to bring in Jan Egeland, Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. Jan, you've also said that this is the darkest hour for Sudan. If you could talk about the worsening humanitarian crisis in the midst of this horrific war and how much worse that humanitarian crisis has been made by cuts in U.S. aid funding as well as among EU donors.
It is by far the worst displacement crisis in the world. 15 million people now displaced by violence. I've been there twice now during this last 2 years of war, and you see devastation everywhere, really. But we are many groups on the ground. Norwegian Refugee Council is in West Darfur, in North Darfur, and South Darfur, when Tawila, to where people now flee from the Zamzam camp. We try to provide as much relief as we can, but indeed, aid is scarce, and it's beyond me that when I was in the UN in 2003, 22 years ago, during the first Darfur crisis, this was on the agenda of President Bush of the United States, Prime Minister Blair of the United Kingdom, of the European Commission. We did not lack funding, and we could scale up with a large aid operation. Today, many more are displaced than at that time. More people starve, and there is silence, really, and little funding. The U.S. being the largest historically to Sudan, suspended all aid to all countries on the 20th of January, including to us and in Sudan. Now we hope we will get back at least some of it, hopefully most of it, but there were months with no pipeline for Darfur and Sudan.